Well, is public transit in this city in a death spiral? That's the opinion of David Cooper. He's the principal at a consulting group called Leading Mobility. Recently spoke to people at the city of Montreal about public transit, and he had a warning. David Cooper is on the line. David, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
It's a great pleasure to talk to you. You recently spoke at the City Council's Permanent Commission on Budget and Administration. You didn't have all the greatest news in the world on public transit. What did you share there that you think our listeners should know?
So what we did was release a national report last week on the challenges of transit operating funding. We've seen a lot of challenges on the day-to-day operations all across Canada, where we're looking at operating budget shortfalls for all the major transit systems. And the sad story in Montreal is that you actually have the largest operating day-to-day budget shortfall in the country. It's $561 million, and it's going to grow to $700 million. We had a lot of support from the federal government and the provincial government early on during the pandemic to maintain service levels, but now there's this tension point of how do we actually pay for day-to-day service. The federal government doesn't provide funding anymore for that. And the province is having some pretty, firm conversations with the cities on this, and it's a growing problem. And Montreal has the most pronounced financial day-to-day operating funding issue in the country right now.
It is quite extraordinary. This is a federal government that has very high goals on the environment, and B, loves to spend. I mean, this government really likes to spend. So it is surprising that this is one thing that they are no longer funding. How do you fix the shortfall, David? And I know I've heard, increased taxes, increased fares. How would you tackle that lack of funding or that funding shortfall?
Well, I think we should talk about how we talk about the spending. I think the big issue is this report was actually referenced in the House of Commons in question period the other day, which was a surprise to me. And the Prime Minister was asked, what kind of support you're providing Montreal, and it was about the day-to-day operating was the question, and the question wasn't answered. It was talked about, the Blue Line extension and the REM extension, and we have the same conversation with the province with the new Mobility Infra Quebec discussion. But at the end of the day, if we can't actually run the service we need to run today for people, I'm not sure why we're always focused on these big ticket projects with, ribbon cuttings when we can't even do our core business. And I think we need to refocus that conversation on there. And there's a number of things the federal governments in Germany and the United Kingdom and the United States provide funding to operating funding because they see the economic mobility opportunities, and then also provinces have to provide legislative changes to cities to allow them to collect these new revenue tools to pay for transit, and that could be anything from a vehicle kilometers travel tax, an EV charging tax, and no one wants to be taxed more on things, but we need to deal with the budget holes and challenges we have on our transit system, and we need to get off the conversation of building new stuff versus some of the core competencies of what we need to do on the day-to-day operating.
Take me through the death spiral part of this. Where are we on the spiral, and how do you think it plays out?
So the death spiral is what happens is the way to attract people to transit is a high level of service, so clean, safe, reliable type service. And what's occurred in Montreal because of the structural challenges on transit funding is you've actually parked a whole transit depot's worth of buses. 155 of them are now retired. The fleet size has been reduced. The 10-minute network has been reduced. And there's been a big push for electrification all across Canada. And we have new electric buses all coming in, but we don't have the money to actually run them. And that's something that's also coming here. We have new projects coming online, like the REM, which requires an operating subsidy and which takes away from kind of the bus and metro core services. So when you start cutting service, it's less attractive to people. It's less, access to it. And then you have to cut it again because you keep having the same situation of less attraction, less people. And we're already in that situation. You're the only city in Canada that has basically retired a whole depot's worth of buses equivalent. And it's not looking pretty until really the province steps up and helps with these ongoing operating funding challenges.
We're with David Cooper from the consulting group Leading Mobility, talking about the future of public transit. So, David, one of the things I like about, and I've looked into Leading Mobility and what you do, I know you guys like to project the future and look into the future here. And I just want to know, how do you see things playing out? You know, I've seen a lot of smart people talk about a future where we have autonomous vehicles that are able to provide that Uber-type service at a fraction of the cost because there's no longer a driver involved and the vehicles are smaller and more cost effective. I'm looking at that future. And then I say, well, how does the bus compete with that? I already see now teens and young adults, when they can make a decision as to, let's take the Metro or let's take an Uber, they'll take the $15 Uber ride over the $3.50 Metro ride at times. How do you think this plays out if those rideshare options become cheaper because of autonomy?
So that is something that's a conversation in transit, and at the end of the day, you will not actually get the physical capability or capacity to replace like a metro type service with autonomous vehicles. It's actually not possible from a physics and geometry type perspective. I think the challenge, and you've hinted at it, is there's the choice versus there's the choice rider, and then there's the rider that is dependent on it. And not everyone can be a choice rider. I have a car myself. I take transit, I bike, I take Uber as well. But I'm not everyone. And the same thing with other folks. It's not practical to take a rideshare every day to work. It's not practical to take rideshare every day to school. And even with autonomous vehicles, there's still going to be a cost that's going to be greater than transit. At the end of the day, people take trips based on what makes sense to them from a cost perspective, a travel time perspective, and convenience perspective. But if we can't do that from just dealing with the day-to-day operating issues that we see on transit, people will walk away from transit, and there's significant implications on livability, on your city, on the environment, on the economy, on equity if we don't get this put forward. And what I find frustrating with the conversation is we have provincial and federal government saying this is important to us, but then when we keep saying the same thing over and over and over again, like deal with these structural issues that we have, and then they say we'll just build new stuff, then obviously the message is not getting there. And some pretty drastic things are going to happen, and they're already happening in Montreal, unfortunately.
How much funding should come from users? I know there's lots of debates over how much it should cost. The monthly pass, is it too expensive? Is it not expensive enough? Here in this city, we made transit completely free for seniors. And I've heard from seniors who are like, Elias, I have money. I could have paid the reduced fare, $28 I used to be paying. It's ridiculous that it's $0 now. For me, I have money. What do you think on that end? How much of the system should be paid for in usage fees, passes, fares, that kind of thing?
So what was interesting was Montreal was in a leadership position on transit for a long time. You have some of the highest utilization per capita in real numbers in North America. And one of the reasons why is because fares were lower, because there was diverse revenue tools. You had the vehicle levy, you had direct government funding, so that actually allowed the monthly pass rates to be much lower than you'd see in places like Vancouver and Toronto. And now you're losing this leadership position, partially because we have these structural issues with funding. And these are things that are not entirely in the control of the transit agency. We had a loss of ridership in the pandemic all across Canada. We've had challenges with inflation. We've had challenges with increasing labor costs, construction costs, and supply chain costs. But at the end of the day, there's so much you can take from a transit user. Increasing fares is one of the most inequitable things you could do because it impacts individuals who don't have another choice the most, versus other jurisdictions where they've made the actual policy choice saying we want a fully functioning, sustainable funding model for our transit system where they've had to put in new taxes and fees. 18.5 cents a liter in Metro Vancouver goes to transit. Halifax, which is much smaller, has a benefit area tax. So if you have access to transit, you pay additional subtax on your property tax to give you increased levels of service. These are all the ideas in that report are not new ideas. There's congestion charging going in New York City. There's congestion charging in London to pay for these things. But we're saying is there's a role of the federal and provincial governments for sustained funding, but also we need tools to have a diverse. It's like your retirement. We want to have a portfolio of tools, revenue tools, to have sustainable funding. It's no different than having a robust portfolio in your retirement. It's the same kind of idea. Just if you rely on one too much and it gets constrained, then you end up in these structural financial issues which we see now.
Mr. Cooper, David, thank you for your time this morning. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
David Cooper is the principal at the consulting group Leading Mobility.